We begin with the situation in Gaza, with Israel being warned by the US that its planned military offensive in the city of Rafah would be, quote, a disaster and will not be supported by Washington without proper planning to protect the refugees there. More than 1.5 million people are now living, well, surviving in the city bordering Egypt, the majority having been displaced several times before as Israel, the offensive, pushed south. There have been reports of injuries in Rafah this morning. The IDF airstrikes beginning in the early hours, days after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said total victory would not be achieved until Hamas had been driven from the city. Let's cross to Jerusalem. Let's bring in our senior reporter, Catherine Norris Trent. Catherine, good to speak to you, good to see you. Tell us what the situation is, as you understand it, in Rafah at the moment, and whether we're seeing the start of this Israeli offensive and whether, in fact, the US warning reshapes the events there.
Hi, Gavin. From what we're hearing from people inside Rafah, the situation remains extremely difficult and dangerous for the more than 1.5 million people now pushed down into that very small area on the south of the Gaza Strip. So they're describing increasingly difficult living conditions. Of course, they hear and see daily bombing overnight, the talk of more casualties, people living in fear, people saying that they're terrified, that they have nowhere else to run to after having been displaced several times. And of course, then there's, huge fears about what any Israeli assault into Rafah would do to humanitarian supplies which come across the border from Egypt into Rafah, and whether those deliveries, which already aid groups are saying are not enough, would be impacted even further. UNICEF, the UN's children's charity, has said there are more than 600,000 children currently stranded in the Rafah area. They're very worried about those. And we've been hearing, for weeks now about the shortages of basic supplies such as food. The charity Action Aid has said that people are so hungry in Gaza that they're turning to eating grass to survive. So that fear there very much continuing. The few remaining hospitals, of course, in the Gaza Strip that are functioning, they're there as well. Israel, meanwhile, the Israeli army says that it is continuing operations in Khan Yunis, a little further to the north, which it says is home to Hamas terror cells, their words, and they've been working to clear out and penetrate further the network of tunnels under the city there. You had the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the Israeli military would be pushing down into Rafah, but at this stage we haven't seen that materialising yet on the ground, although, of course, bombardments in that southern area of the Gaza Strip do continue.
It's a shocking image you've painted of the claims that some Palestinians are resorting to eating grass. And Catherine, also, a lot of people watching will be trying to get a sense of what is the possibility of a ceasefire now. The talks, which started here in Paris, the heads of intelligence agencies of the US, Egypt, Israel as well, Qatar. And now we had a counter-proposal from Hamas, dismissed by Israel. Where do things stand?
So at the moment, negotiations, indirect talks, of course, we believe are continuing behind the scenes because, as you've said, we had the framework proposed by Hamas reported with terms which Benjamin Netanyahu a day later hit down, saying that they would in no way be acceptable to the Israeli government. But that left the door slightly ajar, and others in Israel's government have been talking about this, that they wouldn't accept that deal as it was reported, but they could accept some deal because, of course, here in Israel there is huge pressure on the Israeli authorities to get the remaining hostages home. 136 remain in Gaza. More than 1/3 of those are said to have been killed, thought to have been killed, according to Israeli intelligence and the Israeli military. But the negotiations are continuing. Benjamin Netanyahu has this mantra of saying that he wants to push on until absolute victory. But you've got other people in the government saying that they do not believe that aim is possible, and many voices here calling for some kind of deal.